To introduce everyone, I'm Alex Wilson, broker owner of Remax Wealth Builders Real Estate. We have my director of operations to my left, Kyle DeVici. He'll be moderating the questions. So if you have any questions, type them in the question and answer box. We will be doing a Q&A at the end of all of this. So he'll be moderating all those questions wise. We're probably going to answer a lot of those questions during this conversation. And we'll answer additional questions there. So if you have any questions, type them in the question and answer box. And then, of course, we have Elaine Page, Paralegal, awarded Paralegal of the Year in 2013 by the Ontario Law Society. Very privileged to have her on the call with us. So this is our third one of these that we've done. And are doing, and they've been going really well. The first one was just about 40 minutes. The second one went just over an hour. So we have really robust conversation of what you can do. To give you a background on myself, I own a real estate brokerage, and we specialize in investment condos. My own personal portfolio, I have 14 condos. I own a triplex in the High Park area, which I also live in as well. And I have an apartment building in Hamilton. So I have a full scope personally and exposure personally on various different property types and dealing with the tenants in those properties. And from we had that big run up to April 1st wise in the panic, are my tenants going to pay me? What can I do? I also own a property management company as well. So we saw a lot of these situations come and pass. And for the most part, the majority of our tenants did pay. So that was the good news. We did have people reach out to us, and we had conversations with them in regards to what can be done or what should be done with their properties wise if they were having difficulty paying. And we're going to get more into that topic with Elaine wise. But that's basically the background here. Is we're just a bunch of investors, and we wanted to bring the top minds together and discuss how to deal with it when you properly deal. I guess the key thing, right, Elaine? Properly deal with it if you do not have a tenant that's paying. You do not want to take a vigilante justice type of role in this. It's going to cause more problems down the road. So why don't we just jump into it, and I'll bring Elaine in right now. Actually, I just have another note here. One key thing, we do not, I repeat, do not want you to sell your property during this time. This is the absolute wrong time to sell your property. We're in what I call the COVID void right now. Showings are at a standstill at our current listings wise. If you have a tenanted property, good luck being able to show the property, because what tenant wants you actually to have people coming through the property when there's a virus and pandemic going on? Number two, we just had other buildings go down. There are majority of buildings downtown Toronto now are not even allowing visitors or real estate showings in the buildings. So A, good luck getting the tenant to allow you to show the property. B, the building is not even allowing you in the property wise. See, there are so much different unknowns on the market and everything like that. You're going to have to sell at a discount to get the property sold. Now, the good news is all the fundamentals of the Toronto market still exist today. We will get out of this, and whether it's 6 months to a year, and then you're going to see, I say, real estate prices stabilize to what they were actually at around the March 1st before this all happened was. So this is not the time to sell your property. It is the buy and hold time. And if you have a tenant in the property right now, not only good luck getting a showing on it, but B, if the person buying the property wants big investors there moving in, guess what? We cannot guarantee that the tenant will leave when you fill out the N12 form, which says that you're going to own or occupy the unit, which we'll get more into the conversation with Elaine. So just really want to hammer down the fact right off the top, this is not the time to sell the property. This is time to figure out different solutions wise if you're having an issue. Now I will go into Elaine and let's start a conversation about what to do if a tenant isn't paying. So Elaine, why don't you give some background on yourself and define what a paralegal is?
Thank you, Alex. And I just off the top want to say thank you once again for the kind invitation to do this. And also to say, I really think it's an amazing service you're providing to landlords just by setting this up. So thank you for that. So I am a licensed paralegal. What that means is that I am licensed with the Law Society of Ontario. It used to be called the Law Society of Upper Canada. And I am licensed to provide legal services, as are 8,000 other colleagues of mine across the province of Ontario. It's a relatively new phenomena. We became licensed in 2008, and we're the only place in the world actually that has licensing available. So a lot of you think about Aaron Brockovich when you hear the word paralegal, and that's probably true in the States where they assist lawyers, but in Ontario we actually practice law. So the reason that I'm bringing this to your attention is twofold. One, a lot of people don't know about us, and two, most of the work done at the Landlord and Tenant Board, which is an area of practice within our scope, is done by paralegals. And there are very few lawyers who actually appear there. I can only think of maybe a dozen or so in the GTA. And the bulk of representation is done by paralegals. So if you do need help, then it's a paralegal who specializes in this field is the way to go. And I just want to put it out there that I do have colleagues across the province. So if you're, calling in, I know some people sent me messages from up north and out east that they heard the advertising. If you need help in your area, I probably have somebody who can assist you. So zip me an email. So that's what I do. And I've been doing this for 20, I don't know, I lose track, 26, 27 years, something like that. And it's pretty much this and small claims court is all I do. So this is my area of practice. So to come back to what's going on, Alex, I'm really happy that you got most of your rents. Statistically, and this is anecdotally, I don't have hard numbers, but 85% of the tenants in Ontario have paid their rent. And if you think
that's great.
Yeah, it is great. And if you think about that under normal conditions, I would
that's horrible. Under normal conditions, that's horrible.
No, actually, under normal conditions, we only get about 90 to 95% of tenants paying rent. So it's a little surprising that we're getting the good numbers, and I hope that keeps up. So, so as Alex indicated, you can't, and all of you should know at this point, if you are landlords, that you can't just lock out a tenant if they don't pay their rent or if you don't like them. And if you do something like that, you're setting yourself up for a huge fine and all sorts of legal problems. If you are a small landlord and you don't know the rules, you really should be looking at hiring a property manager to get yourself educated and to assist you. So I'll say that up front. So at the present time, the Landlord and Tenant Board, which is the place where all landlord and tenant matters are heard, has suspended most hearings. So what do I mean by that? Anything for arrears of rent is suspended. Anything where there's a termination for owner's own use or a purchase and sale agreement, all of that has been suspended. There are some applications going forward. Often it's tenant applications for maintenance issues, and those are being held by phone, as well as emergency applications. An emergency application is not, I didn't get my rent and I'm going to lose the property because I can't pay my mortgage. An emergency situation is drug dealing, prostitution, those sorts of really serious safety issues. Those are going forward, but with great difficulty. So I know you may think your situation's an emergency, but the test is a lot higher than you're pissed off at your tenant.
And I wanted to jump in, and just so it's clear to everyone on the call, the landlord and tenant board has suspended for the majority of evictions. So what that means, if your tenant has not paid you rent, you cannot evict them currently. If you want to own or occupy the unit, you cannot evict them. Those are not possible right now. Now we're going to go in and talk about what you can do, but I just want to make that clear right now. You do not have a mechanism unless there's a legal activity, and there's a very, very high bar to what the legal activity is defined as. Unless there's a legal activity, you cannot evict your tenant. So now we may have shocked some people. Let's talk about the best way to handle this and deal with that.
Right. So there's all sorts of legal technicalities around this because there was an order by the Chief Justice that that also basically put a stay on anything where there's a timeline. And in the Landlord and Tenant Board, that means that a notice of termination, an N4, has a timeline. You serve the tenant and they have to pay. And then from there, if they don't pay, you issue an application. So the real question in the law at the moment is, does that apply to the Landlord and Tenant Board? And we don't have the answer to that at this point. It's something that we'll find out later on. I take the position that it does not apply and that our timelines are as normal. So the reason that I'm telling you that is I'm going to give you my best advice, but we may find out that something has changed legally, and my best advice won't work because something has now shifted in the law. So what I've been telling people to do is to really, really work with their tenants, to appreciate that not only have people lost their jobs, they may not have savings, they may be dealing with their own health issues or loved ones' health issues. And even if they're not physically sick, there's just a high level of anxiety going on with everyone in this moment about the future. So you have to be cognizant of that. And particularly because your tenant is in control of your asset. And if you do something stupid and piss them off, that's when the sledgehammers go into the walls. And that's when the major damages start to happen. So we don't want you doing that. So the basic idea is this: we're now at the 13th of the month, and money is coming in on the benefit programs. And some people have not applied because maybe they haven't paid their taxes, or they haven't, they're nervous to apply to the government. My understanding is the government is giving money to everybody who applies. And I personally applied. It was simple. It took about 30 seconds. So you need to have a conversation with your tenants about applying because they need money for food as well as shelter, but they need not fear at this point applying. So today's the 13th. I'm assuming rent is due on the 1st in most cases. So as of today, what I would do if your tenant has not paid and has not applied, I would write to them and I would give them one more week, because once you apply, the money comes very quickly. And let them know that if you do not receive your rent, do not make any kind of payment plan, then you're going to commence the eviction process. Now, that makes little sense because we've just heard that you can't evict people. Very briefly, prior to all of this, there was a huge backlog at the Landlord and Tenant Board for a variety of reasons, which I can tell you about more later if you want. And we were waiting for months and months and months to get hearing dates once we applied. So what I'm suggesting people do is the N4, which is the notice of termination for non-payment of rent. To get that in, it's a 15-day notice, which will, if we do it today, will just come shy of May 1st rent. And then apply to the board for a hearing. And the board is not booking hearings, but they are taking applications, and you definitely want to get in that lineup. You can still make a deal. And in fact, once you have a file number, you can reach out to a mediator at the board and make an official deal. So that's what I would be doing at this point.
So everyone that's on the call, what it comes down to is from a government-based level, we do not have guidance on how to deal with these situations, and there are currently not legal mechanisms to deal with that. Now, what the key thing is to communicate with your tenants and understand what the issues are, if there are issues with them paying rent. And we did have on our property management company and even just with individual investors that I have, by having that conversation with the tenant and really turning on your bullshit meter, if I just want to be frank with it, understanding, are they taking advantage of the situation or do they really need it? So when you start asking questions, you're not going to immediately go to them and go, okay, don't worry about it, don't pay your rent. Ask the questions to understand what the issues are. So, and you can guide them in regards to, okay, I need my money too. As a landlord, you still have your property taxes. You still have your maintenance fees to pay. You still have your mortgage, which most likely isn't deferred because it's an investment property. And the bank may not defer that for you. So you need to explain that all your costs still exist wise, and that just because the tenant doesn't have any recourse if they don't pay, that no, they should be paying you because you have a lot of expenses on your end. So it's really a dialogue with the tenant if there is an issue at hand. And if you push a little bit and push in a polite way, because again, you can't go aggressive at them. Push in a polite way to understand what the issues are, and then you guide them. Okay, well, the government's giving everyone $2,000 a month right now to help with their expenses and their costs of living wise. So you start guiding them. So that's number one, to find out, and because obviously you want to collect your full rent. Number two, if there is truly an issue, for example, I'll go Kyle does have someone that's fully laid off that lives in one of his investment units. She unfortunately was a bartender at a restaurant downtown, and he knows that. And she said, hey, I've been laid off. And yeah, you've been laid off. So, and guess what? She still paid her full rent April 1st. He got his full rent.
Yeah, we had an open discussion about it, and she agreed that she would continue to pay for the time being.
Yeah. And okay, so let's say now we're to May 1st. Kyle's tenant calls back and he's like, yeah, money's going to be tight for you. That's where you have the open dialogue with the tenant wise. And maybe you offer a rent deferral on a portion of the rent. So assuming the rent's at $2,000 a month, let's say the tenant pays you $1,500. Well, you have a $500 differential there. You want to still accrue that amount. So you're still going to, as Elaine advised, file the N4, because what you want to do is accrue that amount that's deficient wise. So you work through, and let's say it's 4 months, they've accrued a $2,000 deficit wise, things start picking up. Then you can work out a payment plan with the tenant wise to eventually get that money back. So if you apply a dialogue and common sense approach, I would say 90 to 95% of the issues out there will easily resolve themselves. Now there's still, and I'm throwing percentages out here, Elaine may want to correct my percentages wise, there's still going to be 5%, or maybe it's less than that, where there are really issues and maybe they're gaming the system and everything like that. And this is where, and I really want to promote Elaine and Elaine and handling this wise. This is where Elaine can really help you out. And Elaine has a very, very strong bullshit meter in regards to, she knows how to read in. Yeah, exactly. She knows how to read in when she's with phone calls or email wise. And he's like, no, this person's taking you for a ride and what you can do. And then she can take over that conversation for you if you're really running up against a brick wall with the tenant wise, and she knows what needs to be done. Because remember, you're dealing with a lot of emotions on both ends. You have high stress emotions wise because you're like, show me my money. Where's my money? I have expenses. I have to pay for those. So your stress level is high. And then on the tenant may actually have legitimate money issues and their stress level is high. So if you guys hit head on, then you're going to have an explosion. And now it's become even more difficult to resolve the situation because you guys are both, the hairs on the back of your necks are both up, And now it's really hard to resolve that situation. Now, Elaine's good at resolving those as well, because she's that third party that does not have an emotional investment in that and has been doing this for 20 plus years and knows how to really cut through the fat and deal with these situations wise. But it's all about having that open dialogue. And if you're not comfortable having that dialogue with someone, let someone else have that conversation for you, because they know how to have that conversation. And truly, you will save yourself so much money, whether, again, if it's you having that conversation or it's Elaine or it's your property manager, or if you don't have a property management company, we can refer you to my property management company. There are so many people that can have that conversation for you to help you either collect full or partial, or have the right mechanisms in place to deal with this when we all get out of this whole situation wise.
And Alex, with your property management company, aside from a payment plan or possibly skipping a month, are there any other ways that you're working with them or giving them different options to make payments?
The tenants wise?
Mm-hmm.
Well, really just having the dialogue and make sure that they pay. So it just asking the questions. It's all about asking the questions. I'll clarify. I'm not asking the questions. I can give you my advice as a landlord wise. I have a full-time property manager that asks all those questions wise. I don't ask those questions. Because I also know myself that I get fired up too. So I know to remove myself from that situation. I don't ask those questions. I let someone else ask those questions, because again, when it comes to money, we all get so worked up about money wise. And especially when it's your money, you get so fired up, so angry, so frustrated. That's why sometimes it's important to delegate that out, which I personally do, because it would set me off. And everyone's on pins and needles right now. It's not the time to add extra stress. You already have enough stress. Are you as a landlord going to be employed next month? You don't know that. You have, your kids aren't going to school. If you have kids, they're in your house wise. Well, how do you entertain your kids? You can't take them to the park. There's no programs for them. These realities I live in, because my kids are at home. And your daycares are closed, and you may not be comfortable having a nanny in your house anymore. All these different situations. Everyone has so much stress right now. You can't go see your parents because you may infect them. So there's so much stress. So do you really want to add more stress to the situation by taking on this conversation? Really, that's what it is. Now I have a note here just on my another.
Sorry, Alex, can I just jump in on something that you're talking about, if you don't mind?
Mm-hmm.
So what people should also be aware of is that the person who oversees your case, if you go to a hearing at the board, is called an adjudicator.
Yep.
And adjudicators have a tremendous amount of latitude in giving you the orders that you desire. Mm-hmm. And if they feel, and there's something called, I'm not going to get into all the technical stuff, but something called Section 83, which gives them that discretion. And if they feel as a landlord that you have acted inappropriately, or you've been particularly difficult in this crisis situation, they may not be inclined to give you the order that you seek. What you want to be able to show them is that you tried really hard to work with the tenant in order to resolve the situation before you got to the board. Because if you just go hot and hard on them, the board is not going to show you any love. So that's another reason that you need to, be really aware and cognizant of your own behavior.
Yeah, great point, Elaine. Yeah, there's another party out there that's going to judge you in regards to the way you acted during this time. So you want to make sure that you have, because they're going to ask for emails and everything like that. So you want to show that you were accommodating during these situations wise. The landlord is always cast in a negative light. This was before COVID-19. Now we have a global pandemic wise. So you really have to show that you are truly working with the individuals, if you want to get to the landlord and tenant board and have a case. Now, we talked about on our last call, you want to avoid the landlord and tenant board. You want to use that as a last resort situation. Again, before this whole situation, it was already backed up. Now, imagine all the situations that are being created, and we don't even know legally wise what the government's going to do if they're going to change the rules halfway through the situation, because the system was already overburdened with current cases. So you're already overburdened before this whole crisis. So what is it going to be when we get out? Now there weren't enough adjudicators before. Now it's just going to be, you could be waiting for 6 months, a year, who knows? Once we get out of this to have your case heard. So, and by that time, the tenant could be long gone, right? So we want to try to deal with this on our own, having the right conversations with the tenant wise. Now, in order to, this is going back to what it was Elaine was saying, dealing with the board wise and doing your N4s or your N12s, various things. The landlord and tenant board is a dot the I, cross the T organization. They operate in the letter of the law, not in the spirit of the law. Throw common sense out the window wise. If there's an error on your form, it gets thrown to the garbage, and you got to start the whole process over again. It's called a fatal defect in the documents that are being filed wise. So it is so, and I cannot stress this enough, so important that all the documents are correct. And I know this is how I know Elaine. When the house that my wife and I and my family live in, when we bought this, we bought a pre-tenanted property. And out of the 3 units in the property, only 1 was month to month. So what that means is I could provide them, well, actually I couldn't provide them. The sellers provided that month-to-month tenant with the N12 form stating that the purchasers were going to owner occupy that unit. So they were going to evict that unit. Well, the form was incorrectly filled out. And when we took possession of the property, the tenant had not left. And there was no recourse that we had. We called Elaine in. Elaine was able to have the conversation with the tenant wise, and the situation was dealt with. So instead of restarting the whole process wise, whereas we closed in the property at the beginning of August, and Elaine said it could be October until we could actually move into the property. And we were homeless at the time, but the landlord and tenant board doesn't care. That she was able to have that conversation with the tenant wise. And I think we were it was only 30 days that we were out instead of 90 days, because that whole process has to start over again, because the original gets thrown out. So important that the documents are filled out correctly wise. And Elaine, I'll segue this in. Who can sign these forms?
Good question, Alex. So the only people who are actually allowed to sign notices of termination are the actual landlord or a licensee of the law society, and so that would be a paralegal or a lawyer. What I see all the time is real estate agents and other people signing these documents. And because of, again, it's a whole long story, that the bottom line of the story is that I see notices and applications being thrown out all of the time because they were signed by somebody who's not authorized to sign them. So imagine waiting 5 or 6 months of non-payment of rent and getting to a hearing and having your notices sent, thrown out, and having to start all over again because your real estate agent signed it and they're not authorized to do so.
And some of the stuff is new. I know even last call I was saying something and Lane was like, no, wrong. So a lot of stuff has changed, and it changed as early as December 2019. So what the specific item I'm talking about, normally I would advise people, and Elaine corrected me. I said, okay, if it doesn't work out, you go to small claims court after and you go collect the rent. And Elaine's like, no, not anymore. So Elaine, why don't you talk about the change wise and that we can't rely on small claims court.
Right.
But this may change again. We don't know. But currently you can't rely on small claims court to go after rent from a tenant that hasn't paid you.
Okay, and this likely will change. So there's a couple of different pieces. The first is If you have an order that originates out of the landlord and tenant board, so you've evicted your tenant and you have a physical hard copy order from the landlord and tenant board, you can transfer that order to small claims court for what's called enforcement, which is things like garnishments. Generally, it's garnishments of bank account or wages. You cannot garnish a government subsidy, like, so you can't be garnishing the benefits coming in from the government presently. So those are still fine, and the small claims court is entitled and will handle the enforcement pieces for you. And then there's all sorts of pieces around that that's a separate process. So what happens though is, because of some case law that came out, a very bad decision at the court, the divisional court. So we have the landlord and tenant board has their own internal review process, appeal process called a review, and after that it goes to divisional court, and then after that it goes to court of appeal. And this decision came out of the divisional court, and that is the precedent decision that basically says that you cannot bring landlord and tenant board matters to the small claims court, that the landlord and tenant board has exclusive jurisdiction. And of course, for us, the problem is with that order is that once a tenant has vacated, you cannot bring an application at the landlord and tenant board. Tenants can bring applications against landlords, but landlords can't against tenants. So at this moment, we're in limbo around this issue, because if you're a landlord and somebody's damaged your property and they're left with arrears of rent and done a midnight move, you really have no recourse at the small claims court, and you have no recourse at the landlord and tenant board. At the moment, we anticipate that changing. The divisional court case is presently under appeal at the Court of Appeal, and we expect that it will be overturned. And before all of this COVID stuff, the government made an announcement. There was a new bill that came out, and it had its first reading. And in the first reading, this issue was addressed. And of course, it's not going to have a second reading for quite some time. So right now, we're in limbo around all of this, and it's kind of scary when you think about. Again, you piss off a tenant, they decide to leave in the middle of the night, you do an inspection, you've done your inspection, everything's fine, then you piss them off, and they leave and they smash your walls down. I've had people put potatoes in toilets. That's not a good thing to do. Left water running, all sorts of crazy things because they were pissed off at the landlord. And this is the time bomb that's waiting to happen if you don't act appropriately with your tenants now.
And before I'll touch on two different things, and then we'll get into the question and answer period, because that's definitely built up, and I think people are getting eager about some specific questions wise. Let's talk about last month.
That's right. Yeah, and before we go to the questions, Alex, there's a couple of small points that I want to make generally. So last month's rent deposit traditionally is supposed to be used for the actual last month that the tenant resides in the unit. And it's held there so that they can now have in their money enough money to pay first and last month for their next place. There are some people who are using the last month's rent deposit as in this case, the April's rent. And if you want to do that, I like you to have a deposit, but I understand that maybe this is the only way to manage your situation. You certainly can do it, but I would put it in writing to the tenant that they no longer have a last month's rent deposit. Because what's going to happen is in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, and 3 years from now, when they want to leave, they're going to say, oh, we're leaving, here's our notice, and we're using we call it the LMR, we're using our LMR, and then they've forgotten that they actually used it during this time, and you're getting into a battle with them. So if you're going to do it in writing, and make sure you have a copy of that in writing, and your tenant has a copy in writing.
That goes for everything, right, Elaine? Any agreement with tenants should be documented.
Absolutely, really, really critical. So before we jump to the questions, I'm just gonna talk very briefly about a couple things. I saw something on CBC, which is sort of my most reliable source of information and throughout all of this, where the big banks are being taken to task around how the mortgage deferrals. And that really ultimately, when you look at them, it's interest on compounding interest, and they're being taken to task on this. And I think that, I mean, I don't know, this is total speculation on my part, but I think that that's going to shift. So for some of you who have thought about and opted not to do the mortgage deferrals, you might want to revisit that if you're using your mortgage to pay for the property. So I just wanted, sorry, if you're using your rent to pay the mortgage. I also want to say, and I'm sort of jumping all over the place here, but I want to get to the questions. I also want to clarify, there is a big distinction between a rental unit and a property where you are sharing a kitchen and bathroom with a tenant. That under that circumstance, the rules of the RTA, the Residential Tenancy Act, do not apply. So I saw some questions about students before. Generally speaking, if they're sharing, a student is someone likely renting a bedroom, and you're sharing the kitchen and bathroom, one or both of those things, none of this applies. That's a whole separate entity unto itself.
Yeah, I think, I'll clarify that specific situation. Not now that specific situation in the questions, but just how that applies. You own a 2-bedroom unit. You live in one unit and you're renting out the second bedroom in the unit you live in. In that instance, that's shared accommodations wise, and the landlord and tenant board does not apply. So that person that you're sharing the accommodations with does not have the protections of the landlord and tenant board. So you're a lot more flexibility in what you can do in that situation.
Alex and Elaine, for renting out a residential property, does it matter if the tenant is a student renting out the entire property? You know, just a regular person, a corporation? Are there any differences between any of those?
No, not with a corporation, kind of, yes. And this is, but if it's a student, no. If it's a true, not a non-shared, as we just spoke about, but a true residential tenancy, and it doesn't matter if they're a student, if they're at all. And just a word, this is a general word, and I'm glad you brought this up, around corporations. I understand that corporations are often tenants. It's a really, really bad idea. I don't recommend ever having a corporation as a tenant, because corporations are not live, breathing things. And if you need to do an eviction, it's really tough to do an eviction on a corporation. So they are probably renting it for an employee. And that's perfectly fine, but the employee is the person who needs to be on the lease. So that's general. That isn't even today under COVID. That's always. So the other thing I wanted to say is that there are, you know, I've been watching a lot of podcasts with some of the tenant groups to see what they're up to. And they are advocating not paying your rent. And they're trying to make political points about the inequities. And, you know, I mean, I have my own personal views on that. But one of the things that's seriously lacking is lobby groups for small landlords. And your voice is really, really important, because when the government talks to landlord and tenant folks, they're talking to the landlords that own 5,000 units. And their situations are different than you who owns, you know, 2, 3, 5. It's a very different animal, and you're not being heard. And so with some of this stuff, if you're seeing things in the news that just don't work for you as a landlord, you need to be writing to your politicians, and you need to be forming lobby groups, because some of it is just generally very unfair for you guys who can't afford the hit in the way that the big boys can. So I just wanted to put that out there, so that you had a sense of, you know, this is a time where your voice really matters. And I was talking to someone the other day who said to me that because we're in a crisis situation, what's happening is some of our rights and freedoms are being trampled on. And I say to you as landlord, some of your rights around the stuff is being trampled on as well. And so you need to gather and have a voice. That was, and one last thing before we get into questions. And this is just a general legal recommendation. I cannot do this for you because it's not within my scope of practice, and I hate to be maudlin, but if you don't have a power of attorney or a will, then now is a time to get one and do it right away, because you don't know what your future looks like. I have, there's been a change at the Law Society which will allow for wills to be executed virtually as opposed to in person. And I strongly suggest that you get a will done, and I also strongly suggest that you use a lawyer to do it and not just one of the online packages, because they're garbage.
Great. So
Okay.
let's jump into the questions wise. Kyle, I'll let you fully moderate those and jump in, and then either Elaine and I will offer our guidance and so
Yeah.
answer them.
And I should also say before we get into the questions, some of them are very case specific.
Yep.
I'm happy to answer general questions, but case specific is a problem for me because I have to do conflict checks and make sure I'm not representing the other
Yep.
side of a party. So I just want to
Yep.
put that out there.
No problem.
Awesome. Okay, let's jump into it then. So Emmanuel had someone who decreased the rent by 50%, and his agreement says that he needs to give approval of this. What's his recourse?
If he didn't approve it, then his recourse is to write to the tenant and say, I didn't approve this and I don't authorize it. Let's have a conversation. And if the tenant's unwilling to have the conversation, the tenant's going to get an N4.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So to clarify to everyone, if you don't get your full rent, you're always going to be filing the N4 because that's your deferral. Even if you have an agreement in place, you're still going to do the N4. We're not offering rent holidays in these situations wise. So you always, that's where the recording comes in. So you're always going to file the N4, even if you agree, or in this case, the tenant just gave you 50% less than the rent wise, you're going to file the N4, but definitely, Emmanuel, have that conversation with the tenant wise. And if you're having issues with that, or you don't want to have that conversation, that's where someone like Elaine can jump in.
Great. So Sherry had a question where she's receiving $400 under the rental price, but there's a guarantor as part of the agreement. Is the guarantor liable now?
So I'm looking at you, you missed a critical piece of the question, which most people don't know, which is that the 1-year lease period has ended. So that's actually a really interesting point. With guarantor situations, if you do not extend the guarantee after the initial lease period is up, then they are no longer a guarantor.
Oh,
Surprise!
I learned something every call. Didn't know that.
Great.
So,
one for you, Alex. So where do you see condo prices going in the near term? What's the environment like right now?
Shit. Here's what it comes down to. I see things flatlining next 2 to 3 months. So what? Not 2 to 3 months. 2 to 3 weeks. So what I mean by that, if you don't need to sell your property, people are going to be taking it off the market, especially with buildings full out not allowing showings wise. Then in that 2 to 3 week period, you're only going to be left with the people in the market that have a desire to sell. Also, over the last 30 days, a lot of emotions, right? We didn't know what was going on. Our normal was changing. Now we're getting into this world of a new normal wise. If you've read any books about establishing habits, it takes 21 days to establish a proper habit. So now we're through that 21-day period. We're all establishing our new normals wise. So in 2 to 3 weeks, that's when we'll start to see the buyers that have the ability to buy to start coming back to the market. And I do have buyers still contacting me wise that are like, oh, maybe it is a time now that I want to buy. Remember, all of the fundamental issues that were driving prices up still exist specifically in the city of Toronto. So those still exist. Now you're going to have a decrease in the number of buyers because you have unemployment that's increasing because of layoffs wise, but everything is, for the most part, is going to be a temporary situation. So you're going to have, it's going to start in the next 2 to 3 week period. And you're probably going to have a window. Could be a window of 6 months, could be a window of 4 months, could be a window of 3 months. I don't know how long it is, but you're going to have a window where you're not going to be competing against other individuals, and you may see some softness on prices wise, but you're going to see those bounce back and rebound in the next 6 months to 1 year. So in the short term, no, it's like the stock market. It's not a good thing to be looking at every day. You're going to see prices decreasing wise. And you're going to see some softness. There are going to be some deals out there, but I would expect definitely in 1 year time that is going to change. You're going to see prices increasing again, because also construction activity for the most part has slowed down or nearly stopped wise. So all that new inventory that was coming on, that is now delayed and decreased. Construction activity is decreased. So now we have those inventory issues that are going to be happening again, and that's going to pause everything. So ultimately, short term, yeah, you're going to see softness in prices, but in the medium to long term, you're going to go back to what we were seeing before.
Perfect. So Peter has a 2-bedroom condo unit and the lease is coming due. One tenant wants to move out, so assuming there's roommates, the other wants to stay. So can they have the current lease terminated and have the tenant who wants to stay evicted by the end of the term of the lease?
No.
Oh, you cut out the last little part. What did you say?
Can they essentially cancel the lease even though one person wants to stay after the term is finished?
The answer is no.
Great. So Mike has deferred his mortgage and he wants to know a quick, accurate way of calculating this cost. So essentially there are calculators online. There's different amortization tables you can use. And is there any way to pass on associated costs to tenants?
No.
No.
I'm just gonna, there's a lot of questions, so I'm just gonna
No. You cannot charge any interest or anything on deferred amounts or anything like that. You can't pass anything to tenants. No.
And I think we covered this. Is there any special way to get rent from students?
Not specific to students.
No.
Shioma has a pretty detailed question, so I won't read through it all. If someone is waiting on EI before making payments, is there anything that you can do?
Well, I mean, it's the same general advice that you give them a timeline and then you start the process, and in any time that those payments are made up, the process ends. So it's the same advice, whether it's EI or any other money coming in, it's exactly the same.
You know, I just saw something pop up here in the general chat wise, and I think this is a great example to read. Can you read that and just we'll have Elaine have a quick comment on it, but I think this is a good general example wise that I think a lot of people may be struggling with on this call.
Just the bottom one property?
Yeah.
Yeah, so person writes, I have only one property and my tenant lost their job in December. He paid up to January and partial rent for March, but now stopped completely. My assumption is he's using COVID-19, but he claims the government is not giving him his unemployment check. But I don't want to believe this. How can I verify or accept this as an excuse? And he does not want to agree on a payment plan as well. He says, I don't have money. So are there any third parties to remediate the situation?
Yeah. Okay. So this is exactly, there are people who are, professional tenants who do take advantage of situations. This was likely the case with this particular tenant. You need to start the process immediately with this tenant. In the same way as I'm saying to all landlords, you need to work with your tenants. You can't work with a tenant who isn't willing to work with you. And if they're showing their true colors by saying screw you and other language, which I won't use, you can't evict me, I know Ford says you can't evict me and blah, 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 and do this at you, then you need to start the process. Yeah,
so the answer to that comment, I think a lot of people, if you've had those questions and now the brick wall has been built. So it's, to me, in that situation, a brick wall has been built. Yes, that's absolutely bring in someone to have that conversation. Elaine, we're going to be emailing everyone out her contact information. Again, this is when you want to bring in the professional wise to have that conversation, because she knows how to ask the direct questions and again, read through all the FAD in regards to getting directly from this individual wise and understanding what the issue is. So I wanted to touch on that because I thought that was a good example. Okay, we can
Yeah,
go.
and just as an aside, Alex, one of the things that I did on behalf of my clients, I've been negotiating these things for the last couple of weeks now, is I do ask for verification that they've lost their job, because, and anybody who's sincerely coming to me saying, I really want to work with you and figure this out, has had no issues sending me their record of employment or some kind of verification that they've lost the jobs. The ones who are more difficult, who are just saying, screw you, we're not paying, they're not the ones willing to actually share their information.
Mm-hmm.
And I take a very different approach with them.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, let's keep on through the questions wise.
Yeah, perfect. So Stephen asks, essentially, how do you recommend going about finding a new tenant right now?
So yeah, I would just say quickly wise, you can reach out to me directly. That's something I can give you some advice on what we're doing with those. It is not a great time to have an empty unit. This is another reason why you want to work with your tenants wise. The rental market is soft. You know, you're going to have to offer a reduction in rent wise. Market prices have gone down. And if the building, if your condo building is not even allowing showings, that makes it even more difficult to allow for the rental property to be shown. So you have to have the right marketing material, floor plans, pictures, all that stuff to allow you to virtually market the property, because the person that's may want to rent it out may have to rent it out sight unseen. So there are strategies to take to get your property rented out. But you're going to have to take a reduction in rent right now and price it accordingly to the market wise.
Great. So Alex, are there any other government aid available to landlords of any kind?
No.
Really the only option is to be able to defer your mortgage. Possibly you need to contact your financial institution, and possibly deferring your property taxes and some of the municipal.
Correct. Yeah. The City of Toronto property tax, they have deferred when that is due. I don't have that off the top of my head. I don't have the timeline, but they have, I believe, after the March payment wise, I think they had one due in April. Those have been deferred to a specific date. So yes, there have been deferrals of the property tax payments for the City of Toronto.
Great. So Elaine, Helen asks, so if the landlord-tenant board is closed, do we file electronically, or how is this done?
It's not closed. The hearings are suspended. There's a difference. Yes, you can file electronically for certain types of applications. For a non-payment of rent, you can file electronically. There's a variety of ones that you can file. What you won't get is a hearing date. What you will get is a file number on your receipt. And that's helpful if you want to use a board mediator to assist you in coming to some kind of deal with a tenant, because then they'll have the file number.
Great. And Elaine, in terms of notice, will text messages hold up in the eyes of the landlord board?
Absolutely not. Thank you for asking that question. We spoke a moment ago about the importance of having written communication. Text messaging is not appropriate written communication in a court or in a tribunal. And as a practitioner, I can tell you what a bitch it is trying to figure out how to download and create an evidence package with text messages. Just use email.
Perfect. And Ken asks, Alex, can you share the details of property management company? So yeah,
property management company, that'll get all email out to everyone at the end of this, and the contact that you can speak out to as well. The property management company is called Access Toronto Property Management, and everyone will get an email on that and the services that it provides and everything. So you'll get that.
Great. So Chantel asks on short-term rental companies. So she has a long-term lease that rented out to a short-term rental company and is having issues, especially since her building has now banned short-term rentals. What's a recommended approach here?
That's a whole, other nightmare situation, and I have huge issues with short-term rentals, I will tell you, as my understanding is, all short-term new rentals have been banned at this point across in Toronto.
Great. AP asks, is it better in this environment if someone hasn't paid to give them amnesty and get back your property as quickly as possible?
So how are you going to do that? You have no mechanism. I mean, yeah, in theory, it'd be great. We pay out tenants all the time, but I can't, normally when we do that, we get a consent order which terminates the tenancy. And then if the tenant doesn't leave, I can call the sheriff in. Well, the sheriff's not enforcing and we're not getting orders. So, in theory, it's a great idea, but how do you enforce it?
So I guess I'll jump in on there. Sometimes it's just best to cut losses. So let's say your tenant goes, hey, here's the situation. I can't afford to live here anymore. I'm going to leave on May 1st. Here's your keys. Thanks so much. Sometimes that's going to be your best recourse. Take your keys and re-rent out the property wise. Are you going to take a loss? Yeah, you're going to take a loss. But what you have now prevented is all the stress and anxiety and problems of having someone in there that does not have the ability to pay you, but could, in theory, still stay in the unit, and then you'd be waiting 6 months to a year potentially to have some sort of recourse against them. So I would say, back to Elaine, is there an actual mechanism in place to make sure everything happens? No. But again, have the conversation with the individual, and if they want to give you the keys and they're out of the unit, sometimes that's going to be the best course of action.
And I would also suggest very strongly that they give you a proper either N9, which is a notice of termination, or do an N11 which is an agreement, and have it signed. And the reason I'm saying that is because you don't know in 3 months' time from now, they're going to file some crazy application that you acted inappropriately and they had to leave, and now they want $1 million.
Yeah, so Elaine, thanks. So yeah, if you're going down that course, then make sure the right forms have been signed, just to say that they agreed to end their tenancy, and then so common sense can prevail. Again, having appropriate conversations with the individuals, and if you don't feel comfortable having those conversations, there are people out there that can have that, like Elaine, and that kind of stuff.
So Elaine, Andres asks, can we legally ask our tenants for proof that they've been laid off?
You can ask anything.
Yeah, you can ask them. Sure.
Do they have an obligation to provide it to you? No.
No.
So Alex, this is an interesting one for the rental and general real estate market. How do you do showings in this COVID environment?
You can't. If the unit is tenanted, you cannot do showings.
No,
now.
yeah. So thanks for clarifying. So let's right to we'll go to that example. If you have a tenanted property, can I show the property? If the tenant says no, there's absolutely nothing. Actually, and then even like, you can't force yourself into the unit wise to show the property. So if you have a tenanted property, no, can't show it. Now, if it's a vacant property, and the building has shut certain things down, yes, there's things that you can do. But if it's a tenanted property, no, there's nothing you can do.
Right, and just to jump on that, Alex, so imagine you have a tenanted property, your tenant's nice, they allow showings, and 5 people come through, and then 4 days later, the tenant comes down with COVID-19. Well, where are they going to look? Because they've been self-isolating. They're going to come back to you, the landlord, and say, you didn't take proper precautions, and now I want a lot of money because I am very sick. So I wouldn't recommend doing any showings at all.
Yeah, and that's you're kind of stuck there. What we got next, Cal?
Can tenants ask to renegotiate their rent? It's not for a discount, but to permanently reduce it.
They can ask anything they want. Whether you agree to it is another story entirely.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Elaine, what can you do if someone ends up owing a big balance at the end of this, say $3,500? What actions can you do to get that money back if they don't end up paying it or don't want to pay it?
Well, if you have an order from the landlord and tenant board, those orders, the monetary jurisdiction has recently been raised to $35,000, as it was a small claims court. If you have that order, you can transfer it to the small claims court for enforcement. If you don't have that order under the present situation that I described a few moments ago, you're out of luck.
Yeah, yeah, and that where it comes down to, it may be, again, cut the losses, write off on your tax return, move on. Yeah.
Great. So Anonymous had a question about being able to legally increase the rent more than the provincial guideline.
No.
House in Mississauga though as well.
You know, I want to jump in on that. This is not the time to be actually doing the increases right now. You don't want to be doing any increases right now. This is, again, you don't want to have an empty unit right now. It's not the ideal situation. So I would really advise against doing any increases in the current market conditions. Can you? Yes. Do I advise it? No.
But let's just be clear, Alex, you can only raise the rent on the guideline amount. You cannot,
correct. Yeah, but if you have something that is, this is specific more condo wise, after November 2018, there are no rent controls. Now, that being said, if I can tell you that the rental market's soft right now, as we discussed, and rental rates are going down, and there's no enforcement of that increase either, and everything like that. So really, at the end of the day, you shouldn't be doing rental increases right now.
Yeah, and again, just to clarify, sorry, Alex, because that doesn't mean that if you rented the unit after November 2018, it's if the unit was built, and that
correct,
there's a big distinction there.
Yes, correct. Yeah, built.
So Yusuf had a question. If you recently rented a unit in your basement and a lease was not signed, is it very risky?
Yes. Next.
So Heath asks, how much should you budget for a property manager and for paralegal costs?
Good question.
On condo wise, our rate is for management wise is $119 plus HST per month.
For paralegals, it depends what we're doing for you. Some people work on a flat fee. Other people work hourly. I can tell you that I'm a what's called a senior paralegal. So my hourly rate, is about $225 an hour, which is actually significantly less than a lawyer of my age and experience. And so it really, depends on what it is we're doing for you. And then most of us quote per case, per job.
And I have personally used Elaine. You're dealing with someone with a lot of experience wise. So they know what they need to do. It's not like there is going to be an extended amount of hours that are devoted to it.
Yeah.
She knows how to get to the heart of the case and get it dealt with.
Thank you.
Great. So Alice has a tenant who's on month to month, and they've requested to terminate their agreement. Can you ask them to give you more than 60 days notice?
No.
Great. An anonymous person asks, can the property management sign the N4 form?
No.
Nope.
So you had said an authorized person. Can you explain or go into a little bit more detail about who can sign it?
It's simple. An authorized person is somebody who's licensed, like myself, who is licensed under the Law Society of Ontario. So that's a lawyer or a paralegal or the actual landlord.
Great. So if you have a good tenant, you have a good relationship with them, isn't it a bit threatening to file an N4?
No, I mean, part of it is you explain to them that you need to protect your rights in the same way. This is why the conversation is so important, and you can explain, tell the truth. The board is backed up. I have to protect my asset and my rights, and I'm trying to work with you, but on the balance here, I also have to protect myself. And just explain it. It doesn't have to be adversarial.
No, you're just, all you're doing is filing the N4 so you can accrue the amount, the deficit amount. That's all. And just let them know that's the mechanism employed by the province of Ontario to do that. That's all. Yeah, it's all about communication, how you handle that.
Great. Elaine, Wendy asks, can you find out if a prospective tenant ever complained or went to the tenant board about anything?
Now you can. There's a mechanism at the board to do a search. I don't know, honestly, I've never done it, so I don't know if it's up and running right now because the board is short-staffed, but there's a fee. And you know, the truth is, I don't know if we get tenant complaints against a landlord, maybe the landlord was a real jerk and they deserve the complaints. Like, we don't really know. So I don't know what the value of them is, but you can go onto the landlord and tenant board website, and there is explanation on how to do that.
Now, I will jump in because we, like, as a company wise, we leased about 130 units last year. If you do the proper due diligence on an individual, credit check, employment letter, and employment validation, if you don't do those three things, you're going to be okay. Those are the three main things. Like, the extra step to see if a landlord's ever complained about an individual, you don't need to do that. If you just do the other three things, you're going to be fine with dealing with the person.
Great. So an anonymous attendee has a long-term tenant, but I guess they filed N1 notices to them for rent increases for the past several years, but they only did it through email. They didn't do anything in the mail or written.
Not valid.
Can they write a new lease now to rectify the issue and the liability for the past years?
Yeah, that's a very technical question. My answer is no, because there's case law that talks about what the lawful rent is. And just a very brief story, I had a tenant who rented a unit in 2006, and they've been there, they're there still today, and the landlord had done illegal rent increases. The amounts were close to being correct, but not exactly, and they didn't use the correct form. And at a certain point, the landlord took the tenant to the landlord and tenant board for arrears of rent. And when I calculated it all back, it ended up that the landlord owed about $20,000 to the tenant after the alleged arrears. And because they didn't do it correctly from the beginning, the rent actually reverted back to the 2006 amount, which is why Alex said to you at the very beginning that it's really, really important to use the correct forms at the board and to make sure that they are filled out correctly.
Perfect. So we've covered this a couple of times. M. Charbonneau has both types of investments, residential and commercial. Do the same rules apply?
No.
Perfect. If a tenant has purposefully damaged your property, can you charge them criminally?
That's a specific question that I would need to understand what those damages are, but my initial response would be no.
Great. Zane asks, is everything we're talking about here today apply just in Ontario, or does it apply to other provinces? So if they have other properties in different provinces, what should they do?
Reach out to the representatives in those markets.
Perfect. Elaine, Gabriella asks, do you have an estimate of when the landlord board is going to reopen?
Oh, hang on. I'm going to go see if I can find my crystal ball. It will be when COVID is over and Ontario is open for business again.
Perfect. So Melanie asks, someone has rented a unit and they're roommates. I don't know if the lease is in all of the names of the roommates, but what if, say, 2 of the 3 roommates stop paying rent? How does it affect the landlord?
The landlord could only go after the named tenants on the lease agreements, and unless they're spouses. So it impacts the landlord. That person who signed the lease, who now has roommates, is jointly and severally liable for all the entire amount of rent.
Great. So someone has done a deferral payment with their tenant. Should they be amending the residential tenancy agreement, or recording the email communication is sufficient? How should you be giving notice?
N4, isn't it?
Yeah.
N4. You got to do the N4 because
they've documented the deferral plan. Oh, okay.
They've made a deal. It should be in writing where both parties acknowledge that this is done this way. There's all sorts of different DocuSign software available. People have scanners. I personally want to see those agreements signed by both parties.
Great. And would you still file the N4?
If they've got, yeah, it depends. I don't know what their deal is.
Yeah.
It's a case by case, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Great. So Ellen asks about the mortgage deferrals. So are you able to apply for mortgage deferrals if it's a rental property?
Speak to your bank.
Yeah, it's an individual financial case-by-case situation.
Case 100%, yeah.
Perfect. Melanie asks, a residential rental unit is in one person's name and he has 2 roommates, so we just covered that. Gupin says, I have a tenant who rented 20 other condos in downtown and he's now doing Airbnb. Oh, geez. Seems like a complicated situation. Contact Elaine directly, I think would be the best way to do it.
Yeah, those Airbnb rentals, folks, here's what I'm going to say to you from an investment perspective. There are, I don't know what's going to happen to Airbnb and any of those other organizations in the future, but what I can tell you is that that there are a number of you who invest in properties and then hand your property over to those companies. Don't do it. I mean, if you don't want to manage your company, then go see Alex and get him to manage it for you, or manage your unit. You cannot believe, I could spend 2 hours telling you the horror stories around these short-term rentals. So just don't even think about that in the future.
So I would say, I haven't even read the question, but I would say blanket-wise, because I saw another number of short terms. If obviously they have no revenue coming in, I think this is a time to cut your losses. Just reach out to the company, go, okay, we're going to end all your leases right now and re-rent all your units out of long-term leases.
And
right now.
Therein lies the problem, Alex, because it's become, the question is that a commercial lease now? And it's very complicated. And that's why I'm saying in the future, folks, just don't even think about doing it.
Well, if you look at 12 York and 14 York right now, last week I saw there was 112 rentals currently available in the building wise. Those were 2 buildings that had allowed Airbnb. So that is basically a flooding of the market in regards to people looking for long-term solutions.
Perfect. So if someone had issued a notice for rent increase as of March, is it still legal?
Yeah, it's illegal.
Perfect. So we've covered a bunch of these. Alex, do you see any off the top of your head? A lot of these are now duplicates.
Yeah, I'm not even looking. I'm letting you moderate.
Okay, thanks.
I'll get too distracted by looking at them.
So Elaine, you had said it's not a good idea to rent to corporations. It's not because it's difficult to evict them. It's difficult because there's no one behind it, correct? It's harder to go after someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's say, for example, there's damages. And when you're filling out a notice, and what's called an N5 notice for damages or substantial interference, and John Smith is living in that unit, but the tenant is 123 Ontario. You know, when you're filling out the notice, you have to name the tenant. So you're saying 123 Ontario broke all the windows and smashed the walls in. Well, you could try and argue that at the board.
Perfect. So if someone hadn't paid their April rent and then don't pay again in May, do you file a separate N4? Would you file
the N4, assuming you've done it correctly, runs concurrently.
Right. So does it change anything if your landlord is a corporation?
No, the only thing that might impact if you're a tenant is an owner's own use application. A corporation can no longer do N12s for their own use.
Great. Alex, do you know the names or any groups of small landlord lobby groups?
There isn't any.
Reach out to?
There isn't any, is there? I don't think so. That's what Elaine was saying. Yeah, there isn't. They don't exist yet.
There are some groups, but they are primarily for the big landlords. And so that's why I'm trying, unfortunately, I'm not in a position to organize this, but I'm trying to light a fire under your butt so that somebody will take up the reins and organize it because it's desperately needed.
Great. So Alex, Do you think now is a good time to be purchasing investment properties?
Yeah, I do. In the right in the right circumstance. In the right circumstance. I have no issue with people purchasing right now. I think my very first real estate sale was in February 2009, and that was the bottoming out of the market for the financial crisis. So I have no issue. I have no issue with someone purchasing right now, just understanding all the costs that may be associated with that. But from an investment level, if you get the right deal, I don't have an issue.
And Alex, do you have any predictions out a little bit further, say 1 year, 2 years, 2021, about what the market's going to be like?
Watch my videos. Same. So if you go to my YouTube channel, Alex J. Wilson 81, you'll see all my videos. Why? So those predictions don't change at all.
Great. Elaine, David asks, so what if a tenant is declining to leave at the end of their lease? Or if they've given notice and are no longer willing to leave the property?
There's not much we can really do about it because the sheriff isn't enforcing. What I would do, if you have it in writing and they said they were leaving and they haven't left, there is something available at the board, a particular type of application that you can write to the board and ask for, but again, it includes an order to terminate the tenancy, and so you won't get your order right away, but it gets you in queue, it gets you in line. So I would be filing that application.
Great. So how do you extend the guarantor on a lease after that 1 year lease period?
You would create a new guarantor document and ask the guarantor to sign it. And if they don't, they don't. They're not required to.
Great. So if you did decide to defer rent with your tenant, can you add interest to it or any other charge?
No.
So Barry has a question about a boarder in his home. So I'd recommend contacting Elaine directly, Barry. Andrew asks, if you come up with an agreement between the owner and the tenant for rental decrease, how long can this continued decrease occur before you jeopardize the standard rental rate?
Generally speaking, 1 year, but this situation, it's an anomaly. So the general rule is that once a rent is determined to be the rent for a period of a year, then that becomes the rent. So I would go with that. I would do a reduction for a maximum 11 months.
Great. So an anonymous attendee has asked, I guess he's renting out his unit and the tenants are responsible for the utility bills. So what can you do if they stop paying those bills?
This is a common problem, and unfortunately the Residential Tenancies Act and Landlord and Tenant Board do not deal in utilities. It's a small claims court issue. And then again, we have a problem, as I've already identified, with a small claims court. So you're kind of stuck. Ultimately, you have to pay them, otherwise those services will be cut, and then you'll be withholding vital services. It'll also go on your taxes if they don't get paid.
And I want to clarify with everyone. There's a lot of negativity we're obviously talking about, and just because there's so much unknowns. But overall, owning real estate, it's a fantastic investment tool. What you deal with right now, this is going to be the absolute worst that you ever deal with right now. This, like, it is a stormy day. But this is going to be the worst that you deal with. Again, in the future wise, it's going to go back to normal wise. So I just want to clarify with everyone, this is a small term pain that you're experiencing. And when you are in the stock market, the companies that have went down, we don't know if those values will ever go back up again, or if those companies will exist in the future wise. We all know that prices are going to be going up. And again, I'll go back to, if you don't feel comfortable having these conversations, the answer isn't sell your unit, cutting losses, and those type of things. Just hire the people that can have the conversations for you and can handle these conversations. The whole purpose of these webinars is to show you, there'll be different topics that we're going to be doing in the future wise, but we're just specific on this now. But the whole purpose of these webinars is to show you if you do the proper things, you can build tremendous wealth by being a real estate investor. And I'm sure Elaine can say with all her clients wise, she probably has some very wealthy individuals that she's seen their fortunes grow over the last 20 to 25 years she's been doing this. So I just wanted to clarify with everyone, because we're getting all, what if the tenant doesn't pay my rent? When you sit down on a piece of paper and you're like, okay, this is how much money I may have lost in this short period, but this is how much I've gained over the last 5, 10, 15 years, or even shorter period wise, you'll see, oh man, I've made a lot of money. Okay, this just wanted to put a big picture for everyone out there.
Yeah, and Alex, just to jump on that, you have to appreciate that I'm quite tainted because I've been evicting tenants for many years. And you know, one day we'll sit down and I'll share some of my favorite stories. Not today, but you're quite right. I mean, I've had one couple who were my very first clients back when, and they had a single unit, and now 27 years later, they probably have 40 or 50 units and have done extremely well for themselves. So you're quite right. If you manage it correctly, there's money to be made, no question.
Yeah, and that's where, you know, I just wanted to put a sunshine out for people out there. So we can jump back into the questions wise, but I just wanted to add that point.
Great, thanks guys. So David asks, and this is a common question, what if you wanted to take back the property to move yourself or your family into it? What can you do, Elaine?
Nothing right now.
Okay, so that's a whole process onto itself, which has been terribly abused over the last few years. And so the test and the bars to do that are extremely high. I'm not going to run the whole process with you, but what I will tell you is that it has to be legitimate. You can't just BS your way and say, I want to live there, and then, you know, use it for storage or re-rent it in 3 months' time for 3 times the amount you're renting it now, or play any of the games. And I trust me when I tell you, I have heard all of the games and all of the little angles that go along with this. The bottom line is, if you're not really going to live there yourself, you can't do this type of application. And again, even if you fully intend on living there yourself, you can serve the notices, but you're not getting an order to terminate the tenancy until who knows when.
Yeah. So, and I've done it because that's how I moved into my house wise. The N12, which is the form that you do to start the process wise, again, they've suspended evictions for those as well. So 2 different stories wise. So number one, if we are pre-COVID, you know, there's a proper system to follow and don't play any games with it. But now we're in COVID now. So if you said to your tenants, I want to move into the property wise, there is no mechanism to force the tenants to leave currently. Can you have a conversation with them? 100%. This is where you can have a conversation with them, let them know, but there's nothing that you can do to make sure the tenants leave. And I'll also add another point to this. If you own or occupy a unit, and this is fairly recent, I say 2017, if you own or occupy the unit, you have to pay the tenant, and this was pre-COVID anyways, 1 month rent. You have to do that if you're owner occupying a unit. That's new legislation that came out, just so you know.
Great, thanks. So Alex, what is the new construction industry doing right now? Can you comment on that? Yeah,
their costs are continuing to go up and through the roof. Remember, our dollar is going down in value right now. I don't know what we're at today, but last I heard was 71. Maybe we're in the 70s. Maybe we have a bump because the OPEC oil actually came to an agreement wise, but our dollar's down. A lot of the materials we buy are out of country. So if you just look at material costs alone, because of the decreased value of our dollar, that puts upward pressure on material prices coming in to build the buildings. Labor has gone up as well. I have conversations with builders. The last 2 weeks I've been having them, and prices are, you may be like, that's crazy, but prices are going to be going up the pre-build wise for any new projects that don't have their costs locked into place already. I've had these conversations the last 2 weeks. Prices are going up because that's literally how much it costs for them to build the buildings wise. It's not evil greed of the developers. their costs are going up. So we're going to see prices increasing on the pre-construction side, which will then, if the buyers aren't immediately there, may reduce the supply of units that are coming to market-wise, because maybe the appetite of the investors, which will then lead to increased prices because we still have the fundamental supply issues in the market.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. So the next question reads, what can I do if my tenant cannot move their stuff out because moving is banned either through a curfew or moving company is not working? And can
Moving companies are still working. Moving companies are still working.
Great. So what if a tenant is letting their friends come over or encouraging large gatherings? Can you call 311 on them? Or what?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nothing else you can do beyond that.
Great. So Ed says, my tenant advised me to apply to defer my mortgage. How long can I have her not paying rent before I file the eviction?
Why are you taking financial advice from your tenant, first of all?
Oh, that question made my day. I would just reply back, you can also apply for these different mechanisms from the government wise, because there is no guarantee your financial institution will give you the deferral on your mortgage wise. But if the tenant has an issue in regards to they're unemployed or those various things, they will succeed in receiving those benefits from the government. So that's, again, take the stance back, go back to them. And again, if you're not comfortable or you feel like you're getting a brick wall, bring someone like Elaine in to have those conversations for you. But again, evictions are suspended. You cannot evict the tenant. You can file the N4 form to accrue the amount, but you can't actually evict the tenant.
Great. So Susan had an interesting situation, and this actually happened to you, Alex. So she sold her primary residence, and the tenant that was living there, they filed the N12, everything is signed. But what can she do if comes moving day, takes possession of the property, the tenant isn't out yet?
Call Elaine, that's what I did.
I would call me now, because I don't know under this scenario if you have gone and filed an L2 or application or not. And
yeah,
I would also have a conversation with your lawyer about extending your closing.
Yeah, definitely call Elaine. Now I will say in my case, I was fortunate wise. I was staying at a friend's house and we didn't have to leave. He was very accommodating. He allowed us to stay. It can be very stressful. You know, we were getting married that year. It was incredibly stressful and not having a home, and I was beating myself up. I'm like, I'm a real estate agent. How can I have allowed this to happen? Wise, how am I homeless and I sell real estate? This is absolutely insane. It's extremely stressful. Elaine was a calming force in my life during that time. Call Elaine. I think Elaine, that's an even better idea. Call Elaine now to make sure the proper things are being put forth.
Great. So we've gotten a couple questions, and I think we've touched on this a little bit. So if someone does have arrears that they haven't paid after the deferral plan, what can you do to get that money?
So we've answered this several times.
Yeah. And there may be different answers coming in a few months. So it just
and just so you know, I'm looking and I see there's 101 questions, and you know, I don't know how long we're going on this. Let's try to, you know, if we've kind of already answered it, let's try and.
Yeah.
Perfect. So Alex, in terms of renting out properties now, are there any strategies that you should be taking with the market slowing down a little bit, like giving free months of rent or anything along those lines?
We kind of touched on that one before. Email me. Have the person email me.
Great. So would you say now is a good time to buy, or is there a time coming up in the next, say, 2 to 3 weeks or months? What do you think?
We're never going to get through these questions. I already answered that. Now, next 2 to 3 weeks.
Great. Are there any clauses, Elaine, that you can add? I guess this might be a lawyer question. Things like force majeure into agreements or anything along those lines?
You know, just as a quick note, for those of you who don't know this, you are actually required to be using the lease agreements that was created by the Ontario government. So for any new leases that you do, you should use those you need to use those lease agreements. the questions about specific clauses that should go on leases, it could easily be the subject of another hour webinar, easily. So I don't want to answer that now, especially since very few units are being rented.
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, the landlord or tenant board wins. And if you're doing something that's not allowed by the landlord or tenant board, it'll get straight up anyways.
Great. Elaine or Alex, are there any questions that you're seeing? I'm seeing a lot of duplicates here.
I'm been looking at them, so.
Okay, I'm gonna power start the missing ones.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, I have a tenant who hasn't paid for 7 months, has an eviction order. And
that's a specific case, and that person is already at the board, and I wouldn't even consider answering that question.
There's a lot of duplicates here.
Yeah.
I'll
let you guys do this.
Yeah, I'm seeing see again, I have section 78 on damages. Like, these are very specific, case specific questions. So with those of you who are asking me case specific questions, especially if you've already got an application at the board, I will not answer them. I would need to do a conflict check. I'm required by the Law Society. I can't just specifically give you information on your file without checking my conflict check system. So I'm sorry, I can't answer those questions.
Okay.
So somebody asked a really good question, and I don't know where it went, but it's just about the general process for N4. So I do want to talk about this. So let's say it doesn't really matter. It could be any month of the year. So let's start it in January. The tenant doesn't pay in January. You do an N4. February's rent becomes due, and February the 5th, the tenant pays a January rent. Do you do another N4? And the answer is no. Once the month is up and a new month kicks in, all of the rent is due. And in fact, you could be shooting yourself in the foot if you already have an application for rent arrears and then you serve another N4. Because if a tenant is confused about the notices that you have sent out to them, and they say that they were confused, then the board will say, I understand why you're confused and your case is now dismissed.
Okay, I'm gonna answer some power questions here. Tenant has a boyfriend living in her bedroom and said the landlord cannot ban guests and the guests can live there as long as they like to. What can landlord do about it when the other tenant complains? Nothing you can do. About reducing rent and bringing back to normal values wise. That's where you're having a separate agreement in place. You're not changing the lease agreement. That's the key thing. Are paralegal fees an acceptable expense against income? Yes, of course.
Somebody asked me about a lawyer, a referral for a lawyer who'll do wills. I've sent you guys the info. So in the email that goes out, the person that I'm recommending is someone who I've known for a number of years. His name is Phil Tinnen. I can never pronounce his last name. Tinninov, and he's very good at them. And I mean, there are other lawyers who can do them, but if you're going to a lawyer, please make sure it's somebody who actually does them regularly because they are quite nuanced. So you'll get that information in the email out.
Alex, maybe just scan them and see if there's any interest. There's a lot of specific cases. So if we haven't answered your questions, please contact Elaine or Alex. We'll send out all of the contact details with a recording of this session as
well. There's a question. If Elaine is overloaded, do I have peer? I have 30 or 40 colleagues across the province who are very, very adept at this work. And, you know, and this has just been my habit in business generally, if I'm overwhelmed and can't handle something, I absolutely refer it to good people.
So Elaine, are you able to access the property now for inspections or emergency basis as a landlord?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is not a time to go and just start doing general inspections because you're putting yourself as well as your tenants at risk. If there is an emergency maintenance issue, then you should absolutely be managing that. I don't know why, but my Siri went off when I was saying that. That's very funny.
I think a lot of people submitted questions twice. So I'm seeing a lot of duplication.
How backed up is the LTB? Extremely. So just to, in Barrie, I have a case in Barrie. We started with the N4 in November, and our hearing, if all had been well, our hearing date was in June. So my landlords have been receiving rent from November to June. So, and that's Barrie. Toronto East is particularly bad. And Toronto East runs from, I'm not sure, I think it's like Victoria Park maybe, or Warden, all the way to almost Belleville. And there's only 2 adjudicators in that entire region. So they're hugely backed up. So it's jurisdictionally, the backups are different.
Okay, here's a great question, would be at any time. If you have a good tenant and you never increase the rent, can you increase it to fair market value or only raise it according to the rental increase allowable under the RTA for that year? You can only ever increase it by the allowable amount by the RTA. You cannot go back and get all those subsequent increases.
So Alex, here's an interesting one that happened to both of us. We both received notices for new construction buildings currently under construction that the buildings are going to be delayed. What should you do? Should you be consulting a lawyer? Are there any actions you can take now?
No, that's perfectly legal for them to do under Tarion, and the unavoidable delay. That's illegal. There's nothing they can do.
Great.
There's a really good question about deferral of monthly condo fees. And my short answer on that, although it's not my area of expertise, is no, you cannot defer. The condos aren't going to let you, because the condos have a time frame with which they have to put a lien on your property. Otherwise, they lose that right. And so if they defer the payment, then they end up losing that right. So most condo boards are not allowing it.
Okay, I do want to jump on this one. Are you saying for a rental increase to me for a rental increase to be done properly, I have to physically mail it? I've always emailed the form as a scanned document.
It depends on whether you had permission on the lease agreement to email documents.
Mm-hmm.
The chances are you probably didn't, because that's a relatively new thing that came into effect about, I think, in 2018. So technically speaking, those increases could be determined. It depends on the adjudicator, not valid.
So Elaine, if you submit an N4, can you withdraw it if the tenant ends up catching up?
If the tenant, so anytime in an arrears application process, and there's various steps throughout the process, at any time if the tenant pays all of the arrears up, then it's over, it's done, it's finished.
Great. Any others, Alex, that you see?
I'm just going through them as a condo owner. Oh, they defer the condo fee, completely up to the building. Yeah, Elaine just touched that. I already know what that is. Nothing. I'm actually just dismissing anonymous attendees. What are the tools I use to properly screen a tenant wise? You know, I'm actually going to touch base on that one quickly. Very, very important. To make sure that you have a credit check run on the tenant. Do not rely on a credit check that the tenant provides. Now, I know through my office wise, we have an Equifax program, a commercial program that allows us to do this properly. As an individual, I don't know how you do that, but anyone can send you a fake credit form. So I just wanted to add that. Make sure you run your own.
Is there a way people should be handling move-out inspections now?
Probably after, yeah, I mean, the problem with a move-out inspection is social distancing, right? Like if you do it when the tenant is in the unit. It's a little tricky, I have to admit. I would say that if you absolutely have to do it, then you ask the tenants to wait in the hall or wait outside. You come in gloved in masks, don't touch anything, and identify any issues that there might be. Practice social distancing.
Oh, I like this. I got to answer this one. Alex and Kyle, you guys have several rental properties. How is your present sanity? It's fine. Great. I have no issues. How's your sanity?
Yeah.
Just look at the value of your property.
Mine was questionable before we started this, so.
You know, I've seen this one. And I don't know, Elaine, if you've answered. I saw it pop up a couple of times. What if the tenant doesn't want to sign the forms?
And that's fair. The forms being the agreement, make sure that you email them to them and just ask them to verify they received the email. I mean, again, this is about working cooperatively, so I don't know why a tenant wouldn't want to sign them. If they want, like, let me put it to you this way.
Oh, no, sorry. I was on about something else. I was going to, but go ahead, Elaine.
If they want the reduction, then sign the damn piece of paper.
Yeah. You know, people renting things sight unseen. Can the tenant cancel the lease? No-ish. Depend. Like if it's blatantly there's an issue wise, that kind of thing. I guess it does open up some potential conflict wise, but it's just a new reality that we're living in right now. I did notice someone else say, should I wait for renting on my unit? I'd still rent it out now. There's just other things that you can do in regards to making sure you get the proper rental amount later on. It's just, do you want it sitting vacant? As well, if you have a new, this is more on the accounting wise, if you have a new property and you've paid your HST, in order to be eligible for your HST rebate wise, you do need a 1-year lease in place. So there are reasons for you to rent it out now because you don't want to miss the period to have the 1-year lease in place to make sure you still qualify that, because otherwise that'll be a $24,000 loss. I won't get into too specific about that, but there are reasons to get it rented out when you have a new property.
Alice has an interesting question. So her tenant has terminated their lease, but then they changed their mind before the 60 days is up. Are they allowed to do that? And what can you do now if the tenant doesn't leave?
Well, before we would have recourse by bringing an application to the board. At this point, we can't do much. And it's not really a huge issue unless there's a new tenant waiting to move in. So unfortunately, right now, we can't do anything because we're not going to get an order terminating the tenancy.
Great. So Alex and Elaine, those are all the different questions that I saw. Are there any other ones still there that you wanted to address?
I'm just saying, please answer the above question. San, I don't even know what the above question is.
I think there's something about repealing the annual rent increase and will they roll it back? I mean, you know, the government can repeal anything. Will they roll it back if they repeal it? Not likely.
I don't think they would. Doesn't
make sense.
Care of it as well.
No, you don't need to draw a new lease for reduced rent. Please provide info about where to find. No, the small claims court, you can't do any of that right now, anyways. So.
And Nancy, the landlord, and I said this a few times, Landlord and Tenant Board has exclusive jurisdiction over all of the residential tenancies in the province of Ontario. Small Claims Court has no authority whatsoever with respect to evictions.
Oh, here we go. For immigrant student, they're not eligible for the emergency funds and they're not paying rent.
We talked about this already.
Yeah, it's the same thing in regards to a regular person, that kind of stuff. There's nothing you can do just otherwise having a conversation with them. Unfortunately, you have the conversation with them and advise them about the situation. They still owe you money, but it may be a situation where you may get stuck not collecting any money. Okay, so where to find about divisional court? We're not getting into court questions here. I think we're going to shut off questions now. I'm just looking over.
Yeah, I don't see any new ones.
No, nothing. Okay, guys, thanks so much for coming on. Elaine, thank you so much for this time. We have now hit nearly 2 hours on this call. So, you know, we've lost about 100 attendees on here. So I think we've, for the most part, answered everything that's relevant. We will be hosting another one of these in a coming week. So we're looking forward to keeping you up to date on what you can and can't do. But the most important thing to do is just have conversations with the tenants wise. And if you hit the brick wall, call Elaine. I'm going to post her info again here. Just post it in the chat group. Everyone will be emailed a recorded copy of this. And we're looking forward to doing this again. And if you can have any questions, email myself, email Kyle, email Elaine. We'll have some additional information on the property management service as well, but looking forward to talking with you guys. Okay, bye, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.